People keep asking what's the next book they need to read, and the answer is very simple. It's Storm of Secrets and Sorrow by Melissa K. Rorick.
In a world created for the descendants of gods, where the Fae are born to serve, a woman bound to the air of death fights fate and desire. Storm of Secrets and Sorrow is book 2 of the best-selling BookTok sensation, a contemporary dark romantasy legacy series for fans of Sarah J. Maas, Kaylee Smith, and Rebecca Yarros.
The second I knew that this book had me was when I realized it had gods, dragons, shifters, vampires, and witches. It has it all for you.
It even has my favorite tropes like morally gray characters, meddling gods, forced proximity, touch her or him and die, one bed, one horse, he falls first, enemies with benefits, like you can't go wrong.
And everyone knows that it is fantastic because the first book was independently published back in 2023, and the series was a #1 Amazon bestseller with nearly 40,000 Goodread reviews and 16,000 Amazon reviews as of 2025. So you know it's grown even more.
And when it was published traditionally, it was an instant New York Times bestseller.
Make sure you get your copy today of Storms of Secrets and Sorrow. It has an incredible deluxe special edition with stenciled edges, a beautiful foil-stamped hardcover, exclusive design with illustrated end papers, and full-color character art.
You can find Storm of Secrets and Sorrow by Melissa K. Rorick wherever books are sold in print and in ebook.
I recently discovered 11 Reader because a fun fact about me that a lot of people don't know is that I have a reading disability. I have always struggled with reading and concentration, and when it comes to things like PDFs or things that I really need to focus on, 11 Reader has really come in handy.
The fact that I can upload my own content, I have so many business memos I have to read every day.
And then it reads it to you, and you get to choose the voice that reads it to you. You get to have a British accent reading those documents to you.
And I just retain so much more.
I really love the voices. Having a British accent whisper sweet nothings about legal documents to me keeps me going.
Start free with 10 hours of your own content per month. And that's essentially a 400-page book turned into audio for free.
Upgrade to Ultra for $11 a month and unlock unlimited uploads plus 20 hours of premium audiobooks every month. No credits, no commitments. It's really the ultimate listening app when you can't get enough. Being able to retain information is really hard for me when I'm reading certain difficult documents. And I really can't emphasize enough to you guys how much 11 Reader has helped me review so many things for the podcast.
Whether you're writing your own book, you have a lot of documents to go through, or you want to listen to audiobooks, choose 11 Reader and use promo code podcast to get your first 2 months for only $1.
If you want all of your data in one place, you need the Intuit ERP. I'm Damon John, and I run my growing business on Intuit Enterprise Suite. Learn more at intuit.com/ERP.
Welcome to Academia Unlocked, a special series from BookTok for BookTok where we take one classic work and explore it through 3 episodes, moving from understanding the text to deep analysis and finally to cultural interpretation. This is Jack.
And I'm Amy. And between us, we have over 13 years of academic literary training, including bachelor's degrees in creative writing and master's degrees. We built this series to bring the depth we learned in our training into a space that feels like a conversation anyone can participate in.
Each book gets 3 episodes. They build on each other. We start with literary literacy, reading the work the way you would in a high school AP class, close and careful. Episode 2 is our advanced analysis where we shift into a college-level seminar lens. Finally, in episode 3, we look at the book in media, adaptations, cultural legacy, and how it translates beyond the page.
Last week, we set the groundwork for analyzing the Joy Luck Club, who the author, Amy Tan, is, and why she wrote the book, how mahjong is incorporated into this story, who all the 8 narrators are, which was like a lot, and what they've gone through in their lives, the major thematic threads holding everything together as well. If you haven't listened to episode 1, we highly recommend you go back because this episode not only builds directly on top of it, but there's just so much contextual information that you do need to have.
Today, we're going to go into that college level seminar where we're not asking what happens anymore. We're asking how the book is constructed, what intellectual traditions it belongs to, what it's arguing at a structural level, and why it's been at the center of a heated critical debate for 30 years. These are the questions that separate high school reading from a university one, and they're the questions that make a good book genuinely interesting. Like we said, Joyla Club is about the failure of translation. That's what we said in the first episode. Mothers who can't fully put their lives into English. Daughters who can't ask the questions that would unlock their mother's history. And love traveling across a gap that no one knows how to close.
Today, we're going to go deeper on why the failure we spoke about takes the specific form it does in this novel, because it's not an accident. And if you could describe a plot,
good luck to you.
Yeah, good luck. But it is the scaffolding that holds the book together in place of plot, honestly.
It's almost like the structure is the plot in many ways.
Yeah.
Because the structure of the Joyla Club isn't just a creative choice, it's an argument. The way the stories rotate, fragment, contradict each other, loop between 2 continents and 50 years, that's the novel's thesis about what it means to live between 2 worlds and belong completely to neither.
As Jack mentioned earlier before, we're going to talk about the critical debate that has followed this book since it was published in 1989. The Joyla Club is one of those books that gets both praised and attacked from multiple directions all at the same time. And understanding why that is essential to understanding what the book is actually accomplishing and what its limitations might be.
Today, we're going to cover 4 things. The form as an argument, diaspora literature as framework, the function of myth and folktale in the novel structure, and the Orientalism debate. Let's dive into this. Let's start with the form, because everything else in this episode depends on understanding the form of this book, because it's not just a narrative structure, but, like we keep emphasizing, it's really a philosophical statement.
We described this last week, but just as a refresher, the novel is split into 4 sections with 16 rotating stories. There are a total of 8 narrators across 2 generations and from 2 different continents. If structure is argument, then we're going to talk about what that argument actually is.
The traditional Western novel, the kind of form that dominates the literary canon this book entered in 1989, is largely built on a single consciousness moving through time in a linear way. One narrator, one perspective, one arc that builds towards a climax and resolution. Even novels with multiple point of views tend to sequence them so that the readers can construct a unified picture. Actually, I think what's hilarious is a lot of the books that we've covered have not done this. Mm-hmm. And now I'm wondering if that's just like men.
I was just about to say the same thing. I'm like, I think it's just men think in linear terms.
Yeah. And like, unfortunately, that's what they've decided is literature.
Yeah, exactly. And these women just refuse to accept that norm.
Yep.
And as we've been saying, the Joyla Club is among those that refuse the norm. The 16 stories throughout this novel don't add up to a single unified picture. They circle the same relationships from different angles and different time periods, and they leave deliberate gaps. Things happen off the page, narrators contradict each other in small ways, and we're never really getting the omniscient world view of everything that would help you as the reader know for certain what is truth, whose memory is accurate, who's unreliable, etc.
And that formal choice is mimetic, meaning the form mirrors the experience it's describing. The experience of being between 2 cultures, 2 languages, 2 generations is an experience of fragmentation, of partial knowledge, of truths that look different depending on which side of the divide you're standing on. The novel makes you feel that rather than just telling you what it's about.
The mahjong structure of the actual text is worth taking seriously here. As a reminder, the 4 sections are named after mahjong moves. And it's not like B2'd it, D4. No, it's like very complicated, like Queen of the Western Sky or something. I don't remember. Mahjong as a game is built on rotation. So each player taking turns, tiles shifting, and meaning emerges from pattern of play over time rather than from a single move. It's very strategic. It's like a game of gin rummy, if you've ever played cards. That's exactly what the narrative is accomplishing as well. No single story is the centerpiece of this novel. The centerpiece is the relationship between all the stories. And you as a reader only see it when you take a step back from the whole.
And someone might argue that June is almost the centerpiece just because she's the beginning and she's the end. And even so, I don't feel like she's the centerpiece. She's just the beginning and the end of this particular book, but certainly not their stories. There's also a specific structural move that Tan makes with the prologues, those short, unnamed parables style pieces that open each of the 4 sections. They're not narrated by any of the 8 named characters. They're narrated by a collective, almost mythic voices, and their function is to set an emotional register, to say before an individual story begins, hey, here's the shape of what you're about to feel.
This is a folklore technique, which we'll get to later on in this episode. The point of it is that the prologues establish that this novel operates on multiple levels simultaneously. There's the realistic level of, the specific women, their lives, and the history that we're reading about each of them. Then there's the mythic level. And Tan, the author, moves between the mythic and the realistic deliberately, which is very sophisticated, even if you can't tell that on the surface.
Scholars actually classify the Joyla Club generically as a short story cycle or composite novel. I highly disagree. It's like the House on Mango Street. Yeah. It's a series of vignettes.
Right.
Joyla Club.
This is more than vignette.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's a form in which individual stories can stand alone but derive additional meaning from their placement with the larger sequence. Other examples include Jean Toomer's Cain and Gloria Naimler's The Woman of Brewster Place, both of which Tan's book is often read alongside.
The fragmentation of the narrative mirrors what theorist Homi Bhabha calls hybridity. That is the condition of living in a cultural space between 2 identities, where neither fully applies and the in-between space itself becomes a site of meaning. I think this is something Jack and I have spoken to a little bit in the past. We've spoke a little bit about on House of Mango Street, and we're going to keep talking about it as we go through this episode.
The absence of Sun-Yun's voice, that's one of the narrators who's already dead, that creates a structural gap that enacts the novel's central theme. The mothers whose story the daughter can only ever partially know, reconstruct, and therefore speak for.
What makes this book so fascinating is that none of the stories move chronologically in time. There's no movement of time that is linearly direct forward moving. These stories loop backwards and forwards, and scholars have noted that the mother's China stories are not presented as the past, but the present, and that present coexists with the daughter's stories in San Francisco, which are sometimes 40 years later. And the fact that both of these exist in the present is a formal statement about how immigrant memory actually works. The past is not the past is continuous.
Like we've already mentioned, yes, the 4-part structure mirrors the 4 players of Mahjong, but it also can reflect the 4 points of a compass, north, south, east, west, which in Chinese cosmology, each carries meaning, which we do see a little bit throughout. Like they'll mention various things. One of my favorite moments was like, they have too much fire, they have too much earth. And Tan draws on this geometry without making it heavy-handed, letting it work as an undertone rather than a thesis.
Tan herself, in an interview about the novel, said, "I wanted to write stories that showed Chinese Americans as individuals, not as a group with a single experience. The structure was the only way I knew how to do that, honestly," which is a really interesting concept because in Asian cultures, you often think in the collective, and that's how stereotypes work, right? They define the collective. And even though they all have very similar belief systems and struggles and limitations and expectations, they are still very individual.
Yep.
So let's talk about where this novel sits in literary tradition, because understanding the tradition helps you understand what the book is trying to do and how to evaluate whether it succeeds.
The Joyla Club is a work of diaspora literature. Diaspora, from the Greek word for scattering, refers to populations displaced from their homelands who carry that homeland with them into new places. Diaspora literature is the literature that emerges from that condition, writing that is defined by the experience of living between two places, two cultures, and two versions of oneself. Bookmark this. We'll be right back. It has now reached a point that if I don't have my Vionics with me, any of my Vionics with me on a trip, I know that trip is ruined.
My Vionic shoes are my go-to no matter what I'm doing. I just got this City Walk sneaker in black leather and suede, and I cannot tell you how many compliments I've gotten. They are so cute and so comfortable.
So cute. We wore them to a market and you were so mad that it got dusty and dirty and you went home and took care of them. That's how much you love your Vionics.
I've done that to all 3 pairs of my Vionics. As soon as there's a little mark on them, I go home, I wash them because they are perfect.
To add to my Vionic collection, I have the Larissa flats. And unlike the flats that we grew up with that absolutely destroyed my feet, Vionic shoes are powered by VioMotion technology to balance the whole you. Larissa is a contemporary wedged flat that blends modern style with effortless comfort. I tell ya, and my feet are able to withstand walking in them.
And I love the little square toe that they have. I'm a big fan of square toes. What's great about the City Walk sneaker and the Larissa flat, they're great for summer, they're great for fall. Honestly, you can get away with them all year round. Even better, Vionic Shoes offers a 30-day guarantee. Wear them, love them, or return them. Why would you? But you get a full refund within 30 days if you do.
Use code BookTok at checkout for 15% off your entire order at vionicshoes.com when you log into your account. It's a one-time use only.
Vionic Shoes, wearable well-being for your feet. The theoretical framework that is probably most useful for reading this kind of literature comes largely from what we call post-colonial criticism, particularly the work of scholars like Homi Bhabha, Stuart Hall, and Gloria Anzaldúa, which I think we mentioned her.
And Mango.
House on Mango Street.
Mm-hmm.
And this collection of work all revolves around the concept of borderlands.
Bhabha's concept of the quote-unquote third space is especially relevant here. The idea is that when two cultures meet through immigration, colonization, or displacement, neither culture remains intact. What emerges in the contact zone between them is something new, a hybrid identity that belongs fully neither to the original culture nor to the new one, and that often feels like loss from the inside, even when it is, in fact, a form of creativity.
Every daughter in this novel is living in the third space. And it's funny because growing up, my mom always called me and my brothers and people like us third culture kids.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm guessing it came from this. And that's because we're not fully Chinese. We're not only American. And we're a very specific version of Chinese American in a very hyphenated sense that doesn't capture what maybe Chinese Americans were experiencing here at the same time. Lots of complexity. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that what Tan accomplishes and what the phrase is trying to accomplish is describing something that is very fluid and painful. It's not like a very clear 50% here, 50% there. Mm-hmm. It is more of a spectrum.
Yeah. And it's also not just the daughters, right? This is where the sophistication of this novel really comes in, because the mothers are also in a version of that space. They brought China with them, but China, as they knew it, no longer exists. It was transformed by war, by the Communist Revolution, by 50 years of history they didn't live through. So they are also between two versions of themselves. The women they were in China and the women they became in America. So you just have mothers and daughters who are living in entirely different spaces.
And not in the same space either. What the novel sets up then is not just a gap between Chinese mothers and American daughters. It also sets up a gap between two different kinds of in-betweenness. And the question of whether these two different spaces of in-betweenness can ever find a common language.
The ending of the novel, where June goes to China and she recognizes her mother's face in her sister's faces, is Tan's answer in a way to this. It's partial, it's incomplete, it arrived 50 years too late, but it's also very real. The translation finally happens. The third space becomes, very briefly, a meeting place.
One of the scholars in this idea of the third space coined this concept, or speaks to the concept of cultural identity as a production rather than fixed inheritance. That identity in diaspora is not something you are, it is something you actively construct from what you're given from the two cultures. Like if, the Chinese side of me gave me some wood over here and the American side gave me nails over here, together I'm going to build something in which I live. And ultimately that construction is unstable and continuous and ongoing.
Yeah. The mother stories are set in China that, by 1989, no longer existed in the form they describe. That pre-revolutionary China of arranged marriages, concubines, and regional warlord conflicts, which means they are not just remembering a country, but a version of history. And that history exists only in the telling of it. Honestly, it blows my mind that, because you and I were born in 1989, that there would be women who aren't that old by the time we were born who lived in that type of world with concubines, warlords, and arranged marriage, like just this very specific type of culture. And it just it's so different than what we understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, even for me, it's like wild to think about because my grandfather was born in the early 40s. So he's not much older than the daughters.
Yeah.
But he lived in China before the Communist Revolution and fled China during the Communist Revolution as a child. So he has a little bit of an inkling of it. And I moved to China in the 90s. So the China June sees when she goes to visit is the China I grew up in that I first knew, which is nothing like the China of today, by the way. June's trip to China at the novel's close is deliberately described as disorienting, which is the best way to describe any visit to China, regardless of the time period. She's not arriving in a homeland that she feels like she belongs to. She's arriving in a foreign country that shares her genetics. It is a motherland, but because she is American-born, it's not her place. It is a story of a place.
Everything about this book, even to the title, is about tension. Because you hear the title, The Joy Luck Club, and you're like, hell yeah, sign me up. And then you're like, no, thank you. I don't want to be in this club. The Joy Luck Club is an institution that belongs to neither China nor America, but was created in the in-between space of immigrant San Francisco. It is the novel's structural thematic center, a community built specifically to hold what cannot be held by either culture alone. Specifying, I'm not saying I don't want to be part of Joy Luck Club. I'm saying this novel made me sad.
Yeah, it's very sad. Very sad. Let's take a sip.
Yeah.
To describe sad, one of the lines that really hit me hard because it's emblematic of my life and my relationship with my dad, my grandparents, etc., was said by Lena, who's one of the daughters. Quote, "My mother and I never really understood one another. We translated each other's meanings, and I seemed to hear less than what was said while my mother heard more."
Recording yesterday's episode did send Amy to therapy. So, I mean, you were already going to therapy, but it was...
Luckily, I already had therapy scheduled, but I did have to talk about it in therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's sad because it's not something you can really overcome ever.
Yeah.
Right? Because I will always be more educated than my father in English, and I will only ever know how to communicate in English in a way that I think is sufficient for what I feel and what I think. And my father is the opposite. He still does math in Cantonese.
Oh.
And, and we grew up in China, so he also had to learn Mandarin. And yeah, it's a lot.
Some of my cousins, their dad is in Chile while they grew up here, and they can't speak to their dad. They need their mom to translate.
That's sad.
Yeah. They're going to listen to this and be like, fuck you, Jack. Why the hell are you mentioning it? I didn't name names. Now let's go into the next segment. And one of the things that makes the Joy Luck Club formally unusual is that it's not a realistic novel pretending to be a realistic novel. It operates simultaneously on a realistic register and a mythic one. And the movement between those two modes is doing crucial narrative work.
So, as we've mentioned before, just as a quick recap, the 4 sections each have a little prologue that reads like a folktale or a parable with an unnamed narrator, an archetypal situation, and either a moral or emotional truth being delivered in the tone of oral storytelling. They're not decorative. They actually frame the emotion or the stories that follow.
The most famous is the opening prologue. A woman who bought a swan in Shanghai, a bird that was once a duck that had, quote, stretched its neck in hopes of becoming a goose, and carried it to America, intending to give it to her daughter as proof that in America she could have a life where she'd be better than what the world had made her. But at immigration, the swan was confiscated, and the woman was left with only one feather. And she was still looking years later for the moment she could give her daughter that feather and explain what it meant. I was confused about what was happening initially, and I was like, what? Who's this? That was a bummer. I should have known.
Should have known from the start.
Yeah.
So that little parable takes about 2 pages, and it honestly contains the emotional thesis of the entire novel. One feather, a gift that can't be delivered, a mother waiting to find the right timing and the right language to explain her intention and really never getting the opportunity to.
And a daughter that doesn't appreciate the feather.
Yeah, it's a feather. Okay,
Thanks for the feather, Mom. I'm happy that I'm appreciative of every gift. Or I'd be like, oh my God, the feather. And then I'd keep it forever. And then I'd find it in my filing cabinet thinking that I'm going to find my car title when I didn't. And instead I found years of cards and random things people have given me. Anyway, what the folk tale does in this novel, it carries meaning that realistic prose can't really hold. The specificity of realism is essential. We need to know about the 50-50 household expenses in Lena and Harold's marriage. We need to see the chess tournament. We need to see the texture of 1980s San Francisco dinner parties and the mention of AIDS at that time where I was like, oh my God, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
But the mythic register is where the emotional core lives. And Tan moves between them fluidly, which is a significant technical achievement.
These prologues are also connected to the idea of oral tradition in China. The mother's stories have the quality of things told aloud, passed down, and honestly compressed through the retelling that creates their essence, their shape. For example, An Mei's mother's suicide isn't narrated with the psychological interiority of a realistic novel. It's narrated with the clean, terrible clarity of a legend, as if this is something that happened to someone else. It is also told very matter-of-factly. This is what happened, this is what it meant, this is what it cost.
And that narrative mode, the legend, the parable, and the cautionary tale is specifically associated with the maternal inheritance in this book. It's how the mothers pass down not just their histories, but their worldviews, their survival strategies, their warnings. The daughters receive these stories as children and don't know what to do with them.
Now, we could describe the prologues of each section as quote-unquote threshold texts. That's a term that scholars sometimes use. As we said, they describe or establish the emotional or thematic undercurrent of the section that is about to come up before you even read the realistic stories. In their own way, they also operate like frame stories in collections like 1001 Nights or the Canterbury Tales, which are a collection of short stories with one overarching frame story. This is the part where the budget shows up. I always forget how long summer is in California, and all of my work clothes are geared towards fall/winter. I need more summer-appropriate staples.
I'm going to be going to Portugal at the end of this summer, and I need Quince to help me with summer vacation clothes because they have literally everything.
They make elevated essentials using premium materials like European linen, organic cotton, and washable silk, which is my personal favorite, without the traditional retail markup.
They also have amazing shoes. I got their ballerina Mary Jane flats in brown, and I will be walking Portugal in that the entire time. They are so comfortable.
I also recently discovered that they have really fabulous 14 karat gold jewelry. Everything is subtle, delicate, and just classy. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands because they work with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen. So you're paying for exceptional quality, not brand markup.
Quince has everything you need, from apparel to home to bedding to bath and all of the kitchen essentials and furniture. Make your summer wardrobe feel easier.
Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too.
That's QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, for free shipping and 365-day returns.
Quince.com/booktalk.
Need a laptop that's built to perform and designed to last all day? Select Windows 11 PCs starting at $499.99 are now at Best Buy. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
The Swan Feather prologue is the most analyzed passage in the novel. Scholars read it as the thesis of the whole book's project, the gift of maternal experience that cannot be translated without the language to explain it, and the daughter who must wait for that language.
Tan, the author, uses Chinese folk cosmology, including concepts like qi, which is like life force or spirit, the Chinese ideas of fate, how you die, determining whether or not you're going to be a ghost. All of these superstitions essentially are woven into the realistic narratives without being labeled as superstition. The novel presents these folk tales, these superstitions, as valid forms of knowledge, as just part of existence and accepted existence.
Anne May's mother's suicide is the clearest example of the mythic register taking over a realistic narrative. The act is described as deliberate, timed to the new year so that her spirit would have maximum power to haunt Wu Xing, a man who destroyed her. The novel neither endorses nor condemns this framework. It simply presents it as the logic available to a woman with no other power.
That's kind of a theme in all the mother stories of how can I capitalize superstition logically to get what I want, but the narrative never passes judgment on those
Another way of
decisions.
framing it, because people might assume capitalize is like manipulation of sorts.
Yeah.
I think like kind of like what we were saying is like they're using the tools that they have, and it's not many tools, and manipulating other people's thoughts or understanding of superstitions. That is a way in form of it. But, you know, these women didn't have much available to them.
I mean, it is essentially chess. They are playing chess with their lives, and there's no emotional attachment to that and their decisions. Another example is of Ying Ying's belief that she lost her qi, which is her spirit, when she drowned her infant son. It functions in the same way as the example Jack just described. It is a psychological reality for Ying Ying, a way of understanding what she did to herself in that moment that explains what is happening in her present. Even though for us, from a Western perspective, it might be more metaphor, for her, it is a literal belief. And Tan, as the author, refuses to reduce it to either truly a literal belief or metaphor.
Lindo Zhang's escape from her arranged marriage through a fabricated prophetic dream is the novel's most explicit folktale moment in the realistic sections. A woman who cannot fight the social order directly manipulates it through the language the social order itself believes in. It is both a survival strategy and a demonstration of how oppressive the system contains the seeds of their own circumvention.
So let's get to this idea of the Orientalism debate that we've mentioned a couple times. As uncomfortable as it is for me to say the word Oriental, it is a real debate, and it's not a resolved debate. And understanding it changes how you read the Joy Luck Club.
Yeah, we're saying the word because that's what people said, not because
that's what we call people of Asian descent.
Yes. The Joy Luck Club was and remains one of the most commercially successful and widely taught works of Asian American literature in history. It introduced millions of readers to a version of Chinese and Chinese American experience they had not encountered in literary fiction before. For many readers, including many Asian readers, it was a landmark. It was the first time they saw themselves or their families reflected in a book that the mainstream literary world took seriously.
Because it was so mainstream, it also generated significant criticism from within the Chinese American literary and academic circles. One of the most pointed critiques came from a writer named Frank Chin, among others, who were associated with the Asian American literary movement. Frank Chin argued that the Joy Luck Club, along with other examples of novels written at the time, presented a version of Chinese culture that was distorted, exoticized,
Fetishized.
I would say fetishized.
Yeah.
And shaped primarily to appeal to a Western audience.
The term for this in literary criticism, literary criticism, is Orientalism, coined by the scholar Edward Said in his 1970 work, Orientalism. Said argued that the West had historically constructed a version of the, quote, East. It's mysterious, ancient, exotic, irrational, feminine, and it serves the Western culture's needs and has very little to do with the actual complexity of Eastern societies. Orientalist representation, Said argued, again, referencing him, is not just inaccurate. It's a form of power. It reduces a diverse and complex world to a set of flattened images that confirm what Western audiences already expect to see. I would like to point out that it's a man who's making these criticisms.
I don't know if I agree with these criticisms. We'll keep talking about it, but there was so much texture and flavor that I think is so nuanced, and it might seem flat to someone who is unfamiliar with the culture and the realities of it. But for me, who lived it, it was very inspiring how much Tan was able to capture on the page. So again, I think a man's just mad he didn't do it first.
Yeah, as a Chilean American, I have no point of reference to say what it is or is not. I have no input to say there. But what I can say is a woman expressing and showing examples of what women have gone through and their own suffering and their own complexities, and that women are more than just these passive beings, which I actually feel like this Joy Luck Club did not show women being passive at all. Men find that to be a difficult pill to swallow.
Yes, I completely agree. So let me read some more of the criticisms so that we can continue to rage against them. Among the criticisms of Tan's work in the Joy Luck Club is that it, quote unquote, traffics in images that probably reinforce stereotypes. For example, the China that we see in the mother's backstories is a world of arranged marriages, concubines, foot binding, anxiety, women with no agency, ancient mystical beliefs, which is a version of China that critics argue confirms, rather complicates the Western reader's pre-existing sense of quote-unquote traditional Chinese culture, and that it paints it as both primitive and patriarchal. Now, let me tell you, I would never call it primitive.
Yeah.
Traditional Chinese culture is traditional Chinese culture, and it is very well captured here. I think, to me, it comes across as critics being upset that this is the only version of historical China that Westerners have been exposed to, right? It doesn't make it inaccurate. I mean, honestly, I think people would be shocked to know that there were still concubines in the 1920s.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as I was reading this, I was shocked that it was set in the 80s when they're, referencing, and I was like, wait, what? I was doing math in my head. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This isn't adding up.
I mean, the last emperor of China didn't die until like the 40s.
How about the fact that the last person who was beheaded with a guillotine in France happened the same year the Star Wars was released? How about the fact that America's currently trying to get rid of a woman's right to choose and control her own body? Cultures reflect men and their desire to control women. If something is primitive, it's highlighting the
backwards nature of men.
I don't want to call it the nature of men because I don't want to give them an out, because it's
the nature of the power systems.
Yeah.
They reinforced.
And I think that sometimes the critics who are like, you're just trying to point out that it's primitive. And it's like, or we can sit here and say, yes, what was primitive? The treatment of women.
Yeah.
That's what was primitive about it, right? It's not these beautiful art and the beautiful aspects of culture. And even, I think that if you look at hockey players, they're so superstitious. I wouldn't even call superstition primitive or anything like that. But I think when we look at something and we like to imagine we're so evolved and so much better, it ultimately comes down to the treatment of women.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite frankly, if they're upset about this depiction of it, it's because they romanticize a time that shouldn't necessarily be romanticized.
Yeah.
Because it only benefited them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anyway.
Yeah.
I will stop being on my soapbox. I will get off of it.
Oh, we're not done. Because there is a related critique that is also worth naming separately, and that's the accusation that the novel's China is historically flattened. The mother's stories are set across multiple decades and regions of pre-revolutionary China, but they share a remarkably consistent cultural texture, as if China were, in fact, just one thing across time and geography, rather than an enormous, diverse country whose practices varied enormously by region, class, and era. I think it's fair to say something where it's United States, right? Some people call it pop, some people call it soda and cola, a very condensed view of what I'm doing. But you have states, you have different traditions, you have different cultures, but there are things you can say that are just quote unquote inherently American, even though United States is the correct term because South Americans are also Americans.
Yes. As are people in Canada. Now, these critiques have been in conversation with Tan and her defenders for a long time. And quite frankly, I agree with Tan. This is a novel about characters. It's not a sociological portrait of China. It's not meant to capture every nuance of China, which is, at least when I was living there in the 90s, 1.2 billion people.
Yeah.
It's the third largest country in the world. Yeah, you're never going to achieve that in one novel. She has written a novel drawn from her family history. She has attributed it to different parts of China, but she's not actually writing to represent those parts of China. She is writing to represent these women.
And what these women experience are very real things that other women experienced. It's okay that one person's experience doesn't represent an entire culture.
Right. It's like criticizing a cowboy book for not representing all of America.
I think it's a cowboy book, Mark Twain, Great Gatsby,
the South versus the Pacific Northwest,
Right.
Okay, wait. Before we spiral, ads.
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, And free waffles are yours to claim. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Scholars have also noted that the Orientalism critique can itself reproduce a form of essentialism, implying that there's a single authentic version of Chinese experience that Tan got wrong when, in fact, there's no such singular version. Chinese American identity is not monolithic. Tan's version is one version, not the version. Amy has shared her version. But even as you've shared your version, which is decades later, an entirely different experience, you can still relate to aspects of this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know for a fact Southern China is very, very different from Northern China. And there is a mention in this book that one of the mothers has a Shanghai dialect that sounds very slurry, which is true. And then it makes fun of the Northern dialect, which is what I speak in, and how harsh it sounds because it's a lot of shur, chur, her, a lot of R's. And so, again, she's not painting a flat picture, and anybody who accuses her of painting a flat picture is just pissed at some kernel of truth that is being represented.
Yep.
Anyway. I think what is most important when reading this book is not like how accurately did Tan get or not get China and the very specific parts of China that she writes about. It's more about what are the choices she as the author has made to generate the cultural effect and the cultural experience that we, regardless of your identity or the time period, can feel how different it is from our own experience. What does it reveal about pressures on these characters and maybe the author herself? Like, I think that there's a lot of complexity with how Tan has written this novel, and never once does it attempt to say, this is China. So what is it attempting to do?
Yeah. Again, what it's attempting to do, this is a story about mothers and daughters, and it has no place for men. And, you know, it goes back to Frank Chin's critique because Chin, a prominent Chinese American playwright and critic, argued that Tan created a version of Chinese culture that was both inaccurate and politically damaging, specifically to the portrayal of Chinese men as villains and Chinese culture as oppressive to women, reinforced racist stereotypes while being celebrated by white mainstream audiences.
It's just like with The Color Purple and the black male critics getting upset with the representation of black men.
It's like there's a mirror. And again, two things can be true. Is it one of those things where Western audience has a racist stereotype that is overall harmful to Chinese Americans and Chinese culture? Yeah, absolutely.
But is that stereotype grounded in some truth?
Were these men horrible to women? Yes. Yes. You want to break away from stereotypes, you have to do the work. Yeah. It's a lot of things. I'm very conscious and aware of Latin American stereotypes and everything. So I'm always like, I don't know. I'm always aware of those things.
I think that one of the unique problems facing an author writing in this third space or this, you know, third culture, trying to capture in-betweenness is that you're not only writing to the people who have experienced the same in-betweenness, because there are a lot less of them, right? If you're writing for mainstream, you're writing for people who have never experienced this, right? You're writing for the largely white audience that reads published books who have no idea what this is. And you're writing for a Chinese audience, a Chinese American audience that will fight you tooth and nail that you dishonored us by bringing in this truth.
Brought in the white people. How dare you? You shared the issues that we have going on.
Yeah, exactly. As a culture. And I think it does create a certain pressure and does inform the choices you make as an author because, and I've thought about this too when I try to write like BIPOC romance. One of my characters is Chinese American. And I've thought a lot about like, okay, the aunt's going to have a gambling problem. Is that like, how's that going to go over? And, you know, the cruelty of the aunt to the character and her sisters, like, that's a real thing, but
I get it. In my book, it's a fantasy book, and there's a culture based, inspired by Hispanic Latin culture, and they're a very sexy, sensual group. And I've heard, other Latin people say like, it's just perpetuating stereotypes. I'm like, it's a horny ass culture. I'm sorry. Like,
we're just horny. Leave us alone.
See how many cousins I have, okay? Like, I can't help it. But what I also find to be interesting, and I say this as someone who, you and I, Amy, have interviewed many authors. And at the end of the day, the authors that are most successful, the authors that, see it through to the end, that are the most successful, each and every one of them say they wrote the novel for themselves. So to assume that they're writing, and this isn't you and me assuming, this is like an ongoing critical conversation that literary critics have, is like, you're writing it for the white audience. I'd argue no. I'd argue she wrote it for herself. We know she wrote this not long after her own mother had a heart attack. We know that it mirrors a lot of her own experience. And it really reads like someone who was coping.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think that it starts to put a lot of self-importance on the white audience.
Yeah. I also think like we always get told in writing class, right? What you know. She literally wrote what she knew.
I was going to talk about that because what we also learned in writing class was write what you know, but they also highly poo-pooed writing your life. Like write what you know, but don't write about yourself. And between Joyla Club, House on Mango Street, I'm really discovering fuck them.
Yeah.
Write the book you want to write.
Yeah, because how many of our instructors were male or were teaching from the position of being taught by men, right?
Because arguably, the male story isn't interesting. The average white man doesn't have an interesting story in the sense that they go through life with privilege and don't have some of these hurdles that a lot of other women, cultures, races have to go through and experience. So it's like, sorry that you're boring. Okay. Don't put your boring on my creativity.
Yeah. That's, oh my God.
Yeah.
It makes me think of and how that individual had never had anything hard happen in their life ever.
Yeah.
And the fact that that individual also tried to write screenplays and novels. And I'm like, but you don't know what suffering is. Suffering is something you fetishize through the stories you read. You're not actually capable of writing it because you've never suffered.
It's absolutely, completely true. I think that it's hilarious because that individual, like you are absolutely spot on. And that individual also criticized some of the stories that I read and the types of stories that I read. And I was like, there's a lot more to this than you think there is. But yeah, like, I find anything written by women far more interesting than anything written by men. And that could be classical literature. I mean, and I'm calling this classical literature, like great literature, or romantasy or romance. Anything written by women has a complexity that I personally struggle to connect or find in some male authors, white male authors out there. I said it. You've heard me say this before. What do we want you to take away from this episode? The Joyla Club is a book that is just different every time you read it, the more you know about it and how it's built. When you read it the first time, you feel it. The grief, the love, the failure to connect, the partial recovery. That's the novel doing its job only at the surface level, which blows my mind. Like, if that's surface level, that's why this novel fucked us up, because it's incredible.
When you read it at the seminar level, you start to see the structure and form at work and how the deliberateness of the fragmentation captures the diaspora experience. You see the interplay of folktale and realism and how sometimes the realism can't capture the emotions that the folktale does. The structure replicates immigrant memory and that it's not past tense, but a continuous relived experience. And I think this novel does a good job conveying the pressure that these characters are under, this author was probably under, and how do you translate these experiences that are so hard to translate if you've never lived them?
Yeah. And I think it's worth reiterating. Amy Tan wrote this novel for herself. She wrote this novel partly so her mother could read something that showed that her daughter had listened. That's not a literary theory. That's a daughter trying to close the gap that language kept them divided.
It speaks to Tan's talent that this novel is also so formally sophisticated, both as a diaspora text, as a work in conversation with folktale, and something that is just genuinely rich enough to be read critically. But those things are secondary to the fact that the writing of this novel was about an act of love. And it was in itself an act of love.
Yep. Next episode, we're going to continue to fuck ourselves up because we're going to watch the movie. Amy needs to watch it in the morning so that it doesn't bum her out.
Yeah, so that I can go and do fun things to make up for it later.
The 1993 film adaptation. What it kept, what it changed, the ongoing debate in visual media, how the novel has been taught and sometimes misread in American classrooms, and what the Joy Luck Club's cultural legacy actually looks like 35 years later. So, guess we'll see you then.
Yeah, hopefully we're still emotionally alive.
No. You haven't started your period yet.
It's about to start.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you for listening to this episode of Academia Unlocked with Book Talk for Book Talk with Jack and Amy.
If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps other readers find us. And of course, we'd love to hear what you thought of today's episode. Share your comments through our form at booktalkforbooktalk.com, and we might feature your feedback in a future mini episode or in a Patreon exclusive episode.
For merch and more ways to support the show, head to booktalkforbooktalk.com. You can also follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at the handle Book Talk for Book Talk. Bye.
Bye.
I always forget how long summer is in California, and all of my work clothes are geared towards fall, winter. I need more summer appropriate staples.
I'm going to be going to Portugal at the end of this summer, and I need Quince to help me with summer vacation clothes because they have literally everything.
They make elevated essentials using premium materials like European linen, organic cotton, and washable silk, which is my personal favorite, without the traditional retail markup.
They also have amazing shoes. I got their ballerina Mary Jane flats in brown, and I will be walking Portugal in that the entire time. They are so comfortable.
I also recently discovered that they have really fabulous 14 karat gold jewelry. Everything is subtle, delicate, and just classy. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands because they work with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen. So you're paying for exceptional quality, not brand markup.
Quince has everything you need, from apparel to home to bedding to bath and all of the kitchen essentials and furniture. Make your summer wardrobe feel easier.
Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too.
That's QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, for free shipping and 365-day returns.
Quince.com/booktalk.